How does a Broadway musical come into being? For that matter, how does it come to be written in the first place? It's certainly more complicated, say, than writing a poem, if only to the extent that it must involve the talents of a great many people. And then it must be tested against the cruel realities of the staggering cost of bringing a Broadway musical onto Broadway. Currently at the 46th Street Theater here in New York is a new musical, Do I Hear a Waltz? It derives from The Time of the Cuckoo by Arthur Lawrence, which was a play that had a very successful Broadway life of its own some 12 years ago, and then became a film under the title of Summertime. With us today on Camera 3 to discuss Do I Hear a Waltz, and in general the whole mystique of getting a dramatic idea onto Broadway in musical form, is Arthur Lawrence, who wrote the book, Stephen Sondheim, who wrote the lyrics, and Benny Montresor, who designed the scenery and costumes for Do I Hear a Waltz. Before we start exploring, I should mention that Do I Hear a Waltz is obviously most fortunate in its parentage. Mr. Lawrence is the playwright who has given us Home of the Brave, A Clearing in the Woods, among others, plus the book for West Side Story and Gypsy, so he's not new to musicals either. Mr. Sondheim wrote the lyrics for West Side Story and Gypsy, and both lyrics and music for A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, as well as numerous works for television. Mr. Montresor has designed sets for the Spoleto Festival in Italy, for the Glyndebourne Opera Festival in England, and the New York City Ballet, and for Giancarlo Menotti's Last Savage here in New York. And just recently, Mr. Montresor has added another laurel to his career by winning the cherished Caldecott Medal for the Best Illustrated Children's Book of 1964. And the composer who worked with these three gentlemen was Mr. Richard Rodgers. So what more could any musical ask for? Well, first things first. Mr. Lawrence, what's the number one problem among the many that a playwright faces when he undertakes to convert his own work into a musical?
Ego.
His own.
No, everybody's. I think that's one of the problems with doing a musical. It's collaboration. And you mentioned before staggering costs. I think the most expensive is the nervous energy of everybody involved. I think doing a musical is a kind of hell. And you just hope it'll be worthwhile at the end.
Well, what is the, The Time of the Cuckoo, of course, had already undergone one change in an art form. And how long is it since the idea of putting it into musical form started to take shape?
Well, I've wanted to do it as a musical for a long time. The first time I spoke to anyone, I think, was right after Gypsy, and I spoke to Rodgers and Hammerstein. And they felt it was too early. And then Mr. Hammerstein died, and then, by great perseverance, I managed to convince Mr. Sondheim and Mr. Rodgers to do the musical with me. That was the hardest part of it all.
Now, going back to you personally, in a sense, you had to perform surgery on yourself. Would that be a fair way of putting it?
It's too dramatic.
Yeah.
I mean, so many years have gone by since I wrote the play that I don't care that desperately. Also, after I've finished writing something, it doesn't mean very much. And I've always had a tendency to cut too quickly.
Well, now, do you feel that, in a sense, you were creating something that has a life and being of its own because of the needs of the musical form?
Yes. Oh, well, anything has to be changed if it's done as a musical, but this one is basically a musical of character, and that character, Leona Samish, has an independent life of her own, independent of me at this point.
And she's had
3 lives. She's
had 3 lives, exactly.
And I hope this one goes on for quite a while.
Well, I think everybody does.
Yeah.
Well, now, at what point, the decision having been arrived that Mr. Sondheim and Mr. Rodgers were going to work with you, were the decisions reached which permitted them to go ahead and start working.
I don't know quite what you mean.
Well, what I mean is this, obviously, there must be agreement between the writer of the book, it seems to me, and the composer and lyricist that there will be natural places.
Oh, well, most of
that
kind of collaboration was done by Mr. Sondheim and me. We've done several musicals before. We work very closely and I think marvelously together. He's be easier to compliment him if he weren't sitting here. But he really is marvelous to work with, and the way we work, I do a rough outline with places where I think there should be songs, and then we discuss them, what the song should be, and then he takes over. And in this case, and then he, after we had worked all this out, we elaborated on it with Dick Rogers, and then they went to work. That's pretty much the way it was.
Yes. Well, now, at what point do you begin to look around for the talents that Mr. Montresor has brought to A Hero Waltz?
Early.
Quite early?
Yeah, in this case, yes. Because the whole scenic department in the New York Theater is pretty bad. We have very few good designers, and this show, taking place entirely in Venice, needed somebody really special.
Well, you got somebody really special, didn't you?
Yes, we did indeed.
Definitely a man who had been at Venice. Isn't that a fair statement?
Was born in Venice, almost. I was born in Verona, but then I grown up in Venice.
And you left.
And left.
To conquer the new world.
Because it's much better to keep Venice in your memory than to live there. But that is a special place.
Oh, it's easier to do anything about Venice when you're not there. I was there exactly 4 days, and then I wrote the play.
You wrote. But to me, it was a kind of la recherche at the temps perdu. Everything came from memory. I did a very little research. And then I thought they had to be... I was doing scenery for a musical. So I used my experience for opera, and I tried to express Venice and music at the same time. For this reason, everything is painted, it's light, and you have the feeling more the air of Venice, the golden air of Venice, more than the real things.
I'd like to come back to a point that you made, Mr. Lawrence, and that is that, in a sense, this particular musical is created around a character. In other words, it's not just color and music and lights and costumes. You begin with your character, whom you had in the Time of the Cuckoo. Well, what kind of a character is Leona?
Leona's a very American person. She's a person who is emotionally rather frozen, finds it very difficult to release herself and really fall in love, and considers material things a proof of affection, which I think is, unfortunately, rather American.
I think that's true. Do you go along with this concept of the character, Mr. Sondheim?
Oh, certainly. One of the problems that we faced when we were planning it was the age of Leona. It had been cast originally with Shirley Booth and Katharine Hepburn, both of whom, by virtue of their age and quality, made the emphasis on the story slightly that of a lady having her last chance at a romantic adventure. And we made the decision to cast this one younger, and we have indeed a very attractive girl playing the part, which makes the problem a much subtler one, which is you wonder now, what is wrong with this girl? Why is she alone? When she comes to Venice and she's so attractive and all that, how can she possibly have any problems?
Well, that would stir the chivalrous instinct of every male in every audience, don't you think?
I think it very well might. But I think it helps point up the fact that we're not dealing with a problem of age at all, but a problem of what Arthur calls the frozen emotions, which can happen at any age, and which indeed is the core of the play.
There's also a misconception. People think that if you're good-looking and or rich, you have no problems. And unfortunately, it's far from being the truth.
completely wrong, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Now, does the nature of the leading character and her background, the conception of her, as Mr. Sondheim has just expressed it, have importance for you as you approach the designing that's called for by the musical?
Well, I think so. I had to bring on the stage something different from what the lady is. This is the point of the play. She goes in another place and she found herself involved with different, different. So I had to show and to visualize something never seen before by her.
So I think what Benny tried to do and achieved very successfully is the whole piece is really seen through Leona's eyes. So what he did is a very romantic version of Venice. Really is beautiful looking, and then which fits because there's one point when she says that when she falls in love she'll hear a waltz. Well, she finally does, and in the song she sees the whole city waltzing, which is also a romantic concept, along with the scenery and everything else in the show.
So that while Venice in reality exists and is wonderful, this Venice is a state of mind.
Highly stylized.
Yes, absolutely.
I can say even a film of memory, something seen through your memory. So that's the reason I thought from the beginning to have one set dissolving into another, like a
Film.
Like a film. And instead to have to close with a curtain, then people behind are preparing another set, and then the curtain goes up. You see. Instead, this all the set dissolve into another one in front of the audience. This is very theatrical, but I think is right for this story, because
Oh, it's perfect. Yeah.
The critics, in writing Do I Hear a Waltz, have been in agreement in complimenting you gentlemen on your integrity of purpose, how you have resisted many, many temptations that must have come your way in doing a musical about an American girl in Venice. But you have stayed firmly with the idea which was yours when you wrote Time of the Cuckoo.
Oh, the critics are even wrong when they flatter you. There were no temptations. Nobody was tempted to whoop it up and have a lot of peasants jigging around the piazza. It was just wrong, and we really didn't have to fight to hold on to the picture we had at all.
No, it's an intimate musical. It was conceived as such, and there was never any question. I mean, we never even had any large discussions except whether we wanted any dancing at all or not. And we have a small amount of dancing in the show in two places where it seems called for, and nowhere else. Nor is there any large ensemble singing, except at one point where you hear sort of the noises of people strolling in the Piazza San Marco at night. But it's all small ensemble sounds. The largest number is for 5 voices.
6.
Oh, the party song? All right, yes.